my thanks as well to all of you for attending and to the hospice as well. I think that is a wonderful philanthropy, and I'm really, really glad that we have the opportunity to support such a worthy cause. Vonage internationally has created a foundation, and the foundation is employee-led, and the mission of the foundation was voted on by all the employees, which is very consistent with what the hospice does because it's around child health and welfare. And so in the communities in the world that we serve through our employees, and we're about 2,300 strong worldwide, over 20 communities, I think more than 20 communities worldwide, we want our employees through their efforts personally, through volunteer time off, and the resources of our employees and the resources of the company to contribute on a worldwide basis to child health and welfare. So I'm very proud of our opportunity to participate with the hospice. I wanted to spend a few minutes this morning giving you a perspective about what we think about in terms of what we'll talk about is the experience economy. The experience economy. And you may be less familiar with Vonage because it's a US name, although we're a very global company, but we acquired New Voice Media about 11 months ago, and so your familiarity in this market, which is principally with the office here for New Voice Media, now again, it's all part of Vonage. But the New Voice Media acquisition was key to what we do because we think about the communications impact on driving this experience economy. So let me just sort of touch real quickly on what Vonage is or who we are. So we've been around for 20 years. Vonage in the United States really commercialized in the very early days the voice over IP, the voice over internet protocol space. We've grown very quickly back in the old residential telephony world, bringing a voice over IP technology. But when I joined 5 years ago, and again, as Anna was saying, I was recruited out of Google, the residential business was in decline, and it continues to this day to be in decline simply because we now all use, or more frequently use, our smartphones than we use a landline phone. So what we've done is we've built a very different business over the course of the last 5 years through about $1 billion of acquisitions to drive this vision into business cloud communications. But again, anchored in this notion of how communications is so integral, so critical to driving better experiences for our corporate customers. So this is some of the success that we've had, and again, I just sort of try to put this in perspective by showing these the revenue numbers. So we've moved from really not being a particularly big factor in business communications just 5 or 6 years ago, now to being quite big and growing very quickly. So that just sort of gives you a little bit of a sense of what we do and how we've approached it. So the notion of the experience economy goes back to research that would say that in the internet economy, I always like using a very simple example. Take this chair. The company who manufactures this chair, in the past, before you could buy anything with a keystroke and have it delivered to your doorstep tomorrow, the manufacturer of this chair would try to win based upon how differentiated they view that product to be. Or the location, because let's say they were convenient to you, so you could buy this chair and get it delivered quickly or even take it home the same day. Or perhaps the price. In the world of the internet economy, it's increasingly difficult for brands to differentiate themselves based upon their product or by their location. Because rest assured, that chair, with a few strokes of your smartphone, you could find in 1,000 different places throughout the globe, and pretty much have it delivered tomorrow. So how does that brand compete? What we find is it's the experience the brand provides its customers or prospects. And what's key to the experience is the communications. And so let me go, I'll just talk about what happens in communications. We're all very familiar with enterprise telephony. So there's a phone system inside your company. That technology is all moved to the cloud. Or where New Voice Media began as a contact center or call center technology that's moved from premise-based to the cloud. That was mostly around the employee communications, particularly within the enterprise comms, but increasingly it's the contact center, which is how you're involved with having a superior engagement with the customer. Whether you're going inbound from the customer where they have a care issue, or even outbound to a prospect in a sales call or something like that. The point is the communication systems are driving those interactions, where in the past we used to think about communications intra the company. Now much more often it's from the company to the customer or in from the prospect. And so what's happened as the communications industry has changed is the number of channels by which we communicate have become more and more complex. So you think about someone who starts on your brand's website, is interested in a product, picks the phone up, and calls. Well, they start over because you've moved channels from you're in the digital front door, and now you've moved over to make a phone call to say, I'm interested in whatever I was just looking at on your website. Or you send a text, or you chat, or you get to that brand through social, or you use one of the OTT chat apps like WhatsApp or WeChat or Line or Viber or what have you, and increasing channels all the way. So you have this conundrum, which is communications are ever more important because brands can no longer effectively differentiate themselves based upon what they used to differentiate themselves on, which was the product, the location, and the price. And now you have an ever more complex communications challenge to solve, yet communications is absolutely at the core of driving a better experience with the customer. Think how frustrating it is when you were on, let's say, an airline's website trying to book a flight, and you had a challenge after 10 minutes on their store, their digital front end, and then you spoke to someone. And what did you do? You started over because the system didn't understand the context, which in this example was the itinerary that you were trying to book. So you have to be able to move from mode of communication to mode of communication seamlessly. We refer to that as omni-channel. So a little research again, that this experience side will overtake the other elements of how you compete really quickly. And again, the point to take away with is that great experience, the customer's experience, is based on having a great communications experience. So what we've done to try to organize these different touch points, the whole notion of being able to unify the communications experience and make it more intelligent so that it's better, so you can create or deliver a more pleasing experience to the customer or to the prospect in hope that they become a customer, is bringing together these multiple clouds which go with different types of communication. You could have video communication, voice. You could have the contact center itself. There's all sorts of variants, and there's many more than I put in that wheel there. So what we've done, and what Anna talked about before, is we've created this flexible platform. Because in order to be successful, again, go back to the problem statement. Communications is ever more important. Brands have to differentiate themselves based upon experience, but bringing all these disparate communications together is ever more difficult. That's the problem that we've tried to solve. That's what we're solving. So how do you create the integrated communications experience? The quick graphic of this is what we refer to is the One Vonage platform. So the One Vonage platform is I've been doing software for most of my life, but so think about this as a very modern architected platform, meaning it's a microservices architected platform. And those microservices are around the modalities of communications. It's quite complex, but if you think about it very simply, think about a video service, audio service, IP messaging service, SMS service, etc. The notion is now communications are simply software. The world that we grew up with not too long ago was communications were all disparate networks. So think of the old landline network where we would plug the landline phone into the copper wire in the wall. Later, and that's been around for 150 years, later we then had wireless, which then had a completely separate network called the cellular network that clearly was a completely separate path than the old landline network. They never intersected. You couldn't bring the two together. Even things like fax, as an example, was a completely different modality in terms of how you'd communicate. That's why so often, if you look at your business cards, you might have 3 phone numbers on your business card. You might have a direct dial number, which is your landline. You might have a mobile number on the cell network, and you might have a fax number. Again, in the world where communications is just software, and it's been unified by IP, by the internet, it makes no sense to have 3 different phone numbers. All I need to know is that you're you. And then and the phone number becomes an identifier that you are in fact you. I then can choose the modality by which I want to get to you or communicate you with based upon my own personal preference, or quite frankly, the limitations of the hardware by which I get on the internet. I think often about my phone. And I always say, this is not a phone. My smartphone is not a phone. It's simply a speaker and a microphone that has access to the internet. If this smartphone did not have a camera, I wouldn't do video. If it didn't have a speaker and microphone, so let's say it was just some keyboard device, I would only communicate in text. So again, it's how you communicate is personal preference and the limitations of the hardware by which you get on the internet with, because the communication modalities have now all been normalized by IP. We live this every day. We use FaceTime, that's video over IP. We use iMessage, that's messaging over IP, and obviously we've been using voice over IP. So the notion is building a software stack which is broken down into the modalities, built in a microservices way, built for the public cloud, run on the public cloud, which gives it great scalability, microservice by microservice, and then to attack the broader communications market where the use cases are. So we know that within the broader market, what we call unified communications, which is pretty much the successor of the enterprise phone system, or contact center now as a service, because it's moved from premise to the cloud, which is again, the contact center functionality that's been around for decades. Those are served from the same stack as the programmable communications are. So the point is that the core technology stack is built from a set of microservices that are expressed as APIs. Those APIs could be sold and are sold unbundled or individually to developers who want to build them into other digital environments, or we become the best customer of our own technology stack because we take the same components and build them into the applications, because those are very large use cases. And those who are less familiar with the notion of programmable communication APIs, I always like to cite a very simple example of the ride-sharing business, in particular with Uber. It could be any Uber, Lyft, Grab, Get, blah, blah, car, it doesn't matter. Those are mobile booking services. They have nothing to do with communications. Yet their revenue model depends on driver and passenger finding one another. Because if that ride does not happen, they make no revenue. So using our technology, we embed into Uber via communications APIs the ability for driver and passenger in-app to contact one another either by message or by phone call. Now, this programmable piece of communications, and the way we specifically do it is we spawn a proxy number which looks in the local exchange, which hides the identity of the driver, protects the privacy of the passenger, and it's there just for that one drive, that one ride. Once completed, it goes back into our phone number inventory to be used again. But the point is that if you don't have that ability to find one another by communicating with one another, it would undermine Uber or Lyft or BlaBlaCar or Get or Grab's revenue model. So here you have an example of programmable communications built again from this stack, which is absolutely critical to this brand new business model called ride sharing. So our whole approach is how do you take the most flexible platform built in a very modern architecture to feed the major use cases in the market today around unified communications and contact center, and increasingly around programmable communications. That's exactly what we've done. Now, we've done this for big companies throughout the world, and when you think about the programmable communications, again, you break it down to the components. So I'll highlight one as an example, like video. I sort of did it in a different color. What's interesting about video is there are brand new businesses being built on the back of a video communications technology. So think about remote education, remote service, remote healthcare, remote banking. I just came from Southeast Asia. There are certain countries in Southeast Asia where they are branchless banks that are starting up, digital banks. But the law requires a video link before you can actually add that person as an account holder and make them a depositor. So you build your banking, your branchless banking system on the top of a video communications capability. You couldn't do that, just to be clear, you couldn't do that just by saying to the customer, well, go ahead, FaceTime me and we'll have a conversation so I can see that you're you. Because there's all sorts of verification and validation that you're you that happens on top of it. Another example, we have a large customer that works with a major insurance company in the property and casualty, or the collision business. Meaning, if you have an accident, a car accident, in the past, and this is in the United States application, but in the past, the appraiser would have to go out and visit the car and look at it and write up an estimate of the damage. Now, running on top of a video framework, they've built software that understands intelligently that if this is a 2018 Audi, as an example, and the bumper is bent such and such a way that likely the bolts behind the bumper are equally broke, it's tied into a bill of materials, and so it automatically then would build what the claim is. Again, think of the efficiency that you create in the claims adjudication space by virtue of doing that on video. And you can see that example, again, remote service, remote healthcare, remote education, remote banking, all sorts of examples. That's the notion of these programmable communication APIs. So again, this all comes from one common stack. I'll highlight here on the bottom, which is what we refer to as the Vonage integration suite. And so what's important as you build communication solutions is communications cannot live in a vacuum. It has to be integrated into the other solutions that all of our business customers use all the time. You may be a G Suite. I came from Google. You may be a G Suite company from a productivity perspective, or you could be a Microsoft company. You could use Salesforce for your CRM, or Microsoft Dynamics, or Zendesk, or Soho, or NetSuite, on and on and on. There's all sorts, SAP, ServiceNow, there's all sorts of alternatives. So the whole point is you've got to integrate in the communications into the rest of your digital environment. All right, I'm gonna stop there and see if there's questions, but again, we're thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to host this event. This is exciting for us. We are growing aggressively in market. When Archer and I started talking about this a year ago, I think we were half as large as we are today. And so it's been a real pleasure to continue to make investments in this market. We organize our broader engineering organization, as we refer to as centers of excellence. This is one of our centers of excellence, so we will continue to grow and invest in this market. I appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much, and I'm available if there's any questions.